Hello YouTube. This video is about this front end and I want to make it a sliding flip front end. I've watched a number of videos and some of them are good and some of them aren't so good. One of the best ones I came across was on a channel called BW's Garage. It's a BW''S Garage. I think his design was excellent and we're going to try to follow it. The only thing we're going to really do different is I want to incorporate the bumper as well. I want the front end to look like it's a normal front end except for two pins, one on this side and one on the far side. I want to keep the gap. So the first thing we have to do, I think, is work on this. Make this gap correct. Get this front end squared away. The first step to this process is to have a front clip that's all in one piece. And to that end, I've taken the grill off and redone all the threaded holes and have new fasteners for all the threaded holes, except for this little one right here. And it's broken, there's a crack right there. So we're gonna weld it up. We'll tap our little nut clip in and put a bolt in. Now we're ready to bolt it on the front of the car. My wife and I have been working on the gaps for the last day. And we used a couple things to help us out. If you look at the yellow tape, you can see how nice and straight it is from the front fender down the door. And what we did is we took and ran that tape through holes that were provided for a trim strip that went down the side of the car. The door gaps are real nice, and the bottom of the fender is right up against the rocker panel. We've got good gap all the way around here. Nice gap all the way around there, and nice gap down here. Now we do have sort of the same problem right here in this corner. It's a little wide, but there's nothing I can do about it. The door itself is good. Again, right up against the rocker panel. This is what it looks like underneath. And what you can see is the fender and the hood. And what I want to do is take a piece of tubing and weld it right there. I'll weld the fender to the tubing, I'll weld the hood to the tubing, and that should make it all one piece. That's the plan anyway. Here we go, cutting our first length of pipe. We'll round the edges off so we don't have any jagged edges. Let's test fit our piece. I don't think I have to bend it here. I think the hood is straight enough where the pipe can remain straight. Let's clean up our weld area. Now, instead of looking up from the floor, you can maybe see what I'm doing here. And this is the pipe I'm going to put in right there to bridge the gap. But there's a raised area in the fender here that won't let this sit down. So we'll mark it and we'll cut it and we'll do it in two pieces. And now it fits much better. Then we get some welds on that. We'll clean the area up first. And now we'll weld it in. I've taken some time and welded up our tubing solid. So I think it's going to add some structural strength to our hood project. And this is what it looks like up close. So that came out pretty good. What I want to do is I want to roll back. I want to get it high enough so that we can roll back and get it down here. Okay. Then I want to slide it forward to see how far I can slide it forward to see what interference we have.
Okay.
All right? All right. Are you going to clear the tire? Let's roll it back. Are you resting on something over there?
No, I'm resting on this.
Should it come up?
It's down.
What we're going to try to do now is see if the clip will slide forward without hitting anything. And we'll pick it up just enough so that it will clear and we can move it. Let's see if we can move it. Right here. You got to grab a hold of this also, because this has got to come with it. Yeah.
Okay. Mine came way up.
Yeah.
Did yours come way up?
We hit something.
Where's that?
I got lots of clearance. Lots of clearance. What I'm looking at now is clearance, and I have lots of clearance. We can slide forward another 4 or 5 inches if we want to, but I think all we have to do is clear the rocker panel and we can make the slide. And it's just sitting there with no pins, and our gaps look good. Because the rail bearings haven't showed up yet, we're going to move on to the bearings for up here for the hood to ride out on. And the way I see that happening is we're going to put a brace that sticks out from the firewall like that. And then we're going to have another brace that comes down there, which will make this very solid. And on top of that, we're going to mount a Hudson bearing. And the Hudson bearing only works, in this case, it's because I bought cheap Hudson bearings, if you have tension on the bolt. If you pull down on the ball runs fine. But if you push up on the bolt, the ball doesn't roll. And that's how it's going to be if I just bolt it in. So we're going to put a sleeve on the bottom of our Hudson bearing, the right length, so that when this is up here, we can pull down on that Hudson bearing, and that'll keep that ball rolling.
Well, we've made all the pieces we need to construct the brackets that go on the firewall to support the hood. We have the pieces over here, and we have them mocked up here. The top of the bracket is going to have ears on either side to bolt through. We've made 2. Underneath, we're going to have a support. On the back of the support, we're going to have a foot that we will also bolt through to the firewall. And then on the top, we will have a spacer and our Hudson bearing. When we're done, it'll look like this, but we'll have welded it up.
Here's the bracket we tacked together. It's gonna go right here. See the red laser? We're gonna line the outside of the bracket up with the laser, and we're gonna put the bracket right there. We're gonna mark our holes. We'll center punch our holes. We'll drill some pilot holes. I'm going to use sheet metal bolts for now because I don't have anybody to hold the bolt on the other side, but I am going to through bolt these. But just to see if I'm on the right track here, we'll use some sheet metal screws. It's hanging up on something. The bracket is hitting the hood. It sure is. And I don't want to get rid of the bracket. We may not be dead in the water yet. We made some modifications to our bracket. It's all tacked together. It's not welded together yet. Originally we had the bracket attached to the top of the firewall and the face of the firewall, which would have made it really strong. But there's a bracket that runs along the bottom of the hood, and it was hitting the bracket. And I could have maybe notched out the bracket on the hood, but I want to keep the strength in the hood. So what I did is I cut the bracket off, lowered it down a little bit. I'm bolted to the firewall, and I had to make my spacer a little taller. Everything's tacked. It's nice and solid, and we'll put the hood on and see how it rolls. We have the rear of the hood sitting on our modified rollers, and we have the front of the hood supported by these straps. And what I want to do is see how easily the hood rolls out the first 6 inches, because that's how far I want it to come out. So that's 6 inches. It rolls right back. It's not too loud. And it fits pretty good. We have the seams pretty good. The tape line is nice and straight. The back of the hood is sitting on the Howard bearings, and we have a nice gap there. The front of the hood is sitting on jack stands to get it to the right height so that the door jambs are good. We're right up against the rocker panel on both sides. The only problem I really have is this gap right here. It's too wide. And because it's too wide, it makes this fender proud of the door. And there's nothing I can do about it now. It's just I should have done a better job lining it up when we were lining it up. Because the rail bearings haven't shown up yet, I think I'm going to do a dangerous thing. Because I think I have this where it needs to go, I'm going to do the pins. This is the pin we're going to put on. It's a very nice locking pin. There's not much give this way. So when we mount this thing, we're going to have the pin at the right angle. If I take the base plate and put it there, there's a lot of rock, which is where I had planned on putting it. But if I put it up here where the fender is flatter, it's darn near flat. And because I had to build the structure in back there, there's no structure there at all. I can put this pin anywhere I want. So I think I'm going to put it right there. because this is a gasser, the car doesn't sit level. So I can't very well put this thing on straight up and down. What I wanted to do is to have the same slant as the car. So we'll draw a 90-degree line. So we get that. So what I'm going to do is line up that line in the center of the hole and put a punch mark there. Drill ourselves a pilot hole. Drill a hole big enough for the pin. And what I'm going to do is bolt this in position and drill holes for the little bolts to hold the plate in place. While I'm tightening these nuts and bolts, let me say what BW's Garage said about these nuts. Is they're not nylock, and they probably should be so they don't vibrate loose. I agree with them. I'm going to have to go get some nylock. These are metric, so they're going to be a pain in the neck to find. Well, that one just stripped out, so yep, I'm going to have to replace hardware. And I'm holding it with my hand, so that's nothing. So the pin goes through the hole, and we can slide the keeper down in, and that's what it's going to look like. Now I just need to go do the other side and build the inner structures. I think UPS just saved me from making a mistake of putting the pins in before we put the rail bearing in. I think that's what this is. I'm not expecting anything else, and this is a kind of a strange box. So I really think this is our linear bearing. There it is. We've been waiting for it. And they are really nice. Now we don't need it this long. We're going to cut it off to the right length. But man, there's no give on that at all. They slide really nice. That should make a good installation if I do it right. I've mocked up the rails and I think we're pretty close to where we want to be. This shock mount is slightly to the rear. So we're 15.5 to the end of the rail on this side. And on this side, the rail's right up against the shock mount and we're 15.5. If we measure for parallel, we'll measure at the back here, and we have 27 7/16. And if we measure here all the way at the front, we have 27 7/16. So the rails are exactly parallel to each other. If we measure the angle of the rails with an angle finder, we get 6 on that one, and we get 6 on that one. So they're at the same angle, they're parallel to each other, they're located where we want to put them. The only thing I have to do is cut them off now. And of course we want to cut it off in the right spot. The last measurement that we have to take is the height of the rails. And this measurement is 26 7/8 there. And 26 13/16, we're off by a 1/16 of an inch. Here we are modifying our $50 pair of rail bearings. We're cutting them to length. We're just rounding over the sharp edges. We have carefully clamped and supported the rails in the position that we want. The rail is level with the frame. We're still at 0.6 degrees up on both sides. We're ready to center punch for screws. The way I'm going to mark the center of the screw locations is to use a center punch. Now, a center punch comes in a set, and all it is a bunch of rods with a little point in the center. And in fact, this is the one that fits our application. And it goes down through the screw hole, fitting real nice. And what you do is hit it with the hammer, and that'll mark the frame where we want to drill the hole. And a center punch is a marking tool. It's not meant to be the starting point for a drill. So what we have to do is come back with a punch for every place where we've got it marked and punch it so that we can drill it. And now what we have to do is drill a bunch of holes. I got a bunch of holes in the frame right here that were for the relay and for my wiring harness for clamps. And I'm not going to be able to put it there anymore because of the rail. And I think we should weld up these holes. No more holes that aren't factory or for the rail. And now we can start tapping these holes for 1024 screws. And now we can try putting the rail on. The screw screws in, that's a good thing. And there's 4 screws, and that'll be enough to decide whether this thing's going to work or not. They screw in real nice. And it slides real nice. Tightening the last bolt. Slider still slides good. You know, I was going to build a brace out here, but I don't think it's necessary. Because this is only going to come out that far. It'll never come any further than that. And this is solid steel. It's not a tube or anything. I don't think I need to put a brace. I don't think I'm being lazy. And I don't think I need a brace there, so I'm not going to put one there. I can always put one there later. The next piece of the puzzle is the plate that's going to go on here that we'll mount our hinge on. And what we have to do is determine the length. Now I've put a 1/4-inch bolt through the rail here as a stop for the block. So that's as far out as the block is going to go. And the hood moves forward 6 1/8 inches, limited by the Howard bearings on the top when it hits the brace on the inside of the hood. So we have to be able to travel back at least 6 1/8 inches. But I don't want to limit the travel back by this. I want the travel back limited by the hood. So I'm going to make it 6 1/2. So if I make this 6 1/2 inches from there, and I put this right there, the plate to cover the blocks has to be 13 inches long, but we want it to stick out here so we can put a hinge on it. So 16 inches, we'll make them 16 inches long, 2 1/8 tall. I have a nice piece of metal here. We'll lay out our arms on this. And I went back and remeasured that block, and it is 1 15/16 tall. And there's our piece for the arms. I think that this part of the project is going to be the most challenging. We have to get all 8 of these bolts to line up exactly. The first 4 bolts are fairly easy if I just mark the location and draw 90 down from it. I've got 4 of the holes. The other 4 are not going to be so easy. So that is that one right there, and that is that one right there. Before I forget, there is a warning that comes with these blocks. They tell you not to take them off the rail unless you have the plastic adapter to hold all the ball bearings together. So you don't want to run off the end of the rail. So I stayed up late last night and I drilled 16 holes. However, I drilled these holes for the block too far forward in order for the bolt that's going to be our pivot to bolt into the front. So I had to drill another 8 holes and move the block back. This is going to be our pivot point or our hinge, and it's a 1/2 inch bolt with bunting bearings. I just call them bushings, but bunting bearings. And we're going to mount them in this 1 3/4 inch square tubing, like so. And that's going to go straight up to a brace that's in the hood. Here's the brace in the hood I'm talking about. And I'm going to run that 1 3/4 inch square tube straight up to that brace, and then we'll fortify it. The first thing that we'll do with this square tubing is cut it in half, and that's going to be too long. And then we're going to drill some holes in the ends for those bushings. We have our holes drilled in the arms, and we can tap our bushings in. And that'll give it a nice pivot point. This is what my pivot point looks like. I cut a bolt off to exactly the right length, and I ground a nut down a little bit so that I'd have clearance for this to slide back and forth. And the long bolt goes into the arm. The standard nut goes onto the arm. And then we take our slim down nut and we put that on the arm. Now we can snug up this arm so we have no movement with our jam nut. So make it pretty snug. And then we tighten the bolt on the back side of our traveling arm as tight as we can get it. And now the arm pivots. It's nice and solid, and it's pivoting on the bearing, and the bolt is staying still. Now what I'll have to do is I'll have to put a cotter pin in there in order for it to stay. We have the front clip as close as we can get it, and we've taped it up into position so it doesn't move. We have our upright cut to length, and the angle at the top is correct, and now we're going to try to tack it in. We successfully tacked these in and removed the clip from the car without disturbing them, and now we're going to weld them in. Now to clean up some of my welds. We have the uprights welded in, but no bracing, so I can't tilt it. But I can demonstrate rolling. It rolls out just like that. It rolls back just like that. And I have to say again, just so you know, the hood's not propped up on anything but the rollers. The line's nice and straight, and the gap is not too bad. We'll get on to bracing tomorrow, and the pin maybe. I've switched gears a little bit. I spent all day yesterday trying to figure out how to put a stop in so that the hood would not rotate all the way to the ground. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I've moved on to the bumper project, and I'm not going to spend a lot of video time on it because I know most people aren't going to be interested in it. But what I've done is I've cut the brackets down so that it fits underneath the car. And I'm going to put 2 3/4 inch tubes right here, and then I'm going to run an extension from the upright to those 3/4 inch tubes, and that should mount the bumper. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's about what I'm going to do. While the bracing is done, I didn't show any of the welding because you've already seen me stick enough welds and sticks together. But this is the idea. I have a nice triangle that goes to my upright. Then I have a bracket that goes down to the bumpers, And from the bumper, I actually use the bumper bracket for my stop. I'll show you that when it's in the car. So I have a bar that goes across here, and then we repeat the process. We have bracket to the bumper, and then we tie in a triangulating 3/4 inch piece of tubing, and that's what we've got. This is what it looks like on the inside in the up position with no support. Here's another good look at the bearing. It's just a long bolt, another nut, and a second nut on the far side. And this is the stop I came up with. It was the best I could do. We run from the bumper bracket and it hits the spring. This is what it looks like going down. And all the seams line up pretty much. And this is what it looks like coming up. Well, this has been a busy 2 weeks, let me tell you. And that's how long I've been working on this, is 2 weeks. What's left? The pins. Let's do the pins. This is an interesting problem. This pin is located where I want it to be on the fender. And this is the pin that goes through that hole, like so. That pin location is down here in the middle of nowhere. So what I've done is I've made a plate and put the pin through the plate, and then what I'm going to do is take some 3/4 inch tubing and put it on the back side of that plate and attach it to the firewall. This is the best shot I can give you of what it looks like on the inside of the fender. And my plan is to take a piece of tube and come right off this corner here, which is double thickness, so I can get good penetration, and weld it to the plate, and then put some reinforcement down here, because the stress on this is pulling the fender down. This is what I came up with for the pin. It's mounted out in the middle of nowhere. I used 3/4 inch tube. I welded it to the corner of the cab. The cab is double thickness there. I got really good penetration, and I think it's going to do the job. I don't think we need the secondary brace. So let's see what it looks like when it comes down. I hate these plates. I'm going to replace them. They're a pain in the neck. But they do the job, and the pin goes in and locks. Let's take a final walk around. I've got the front tires back on, and this is the stance of the car. If you look at the yellow tape, it's nice and straight. My seam is pretty good. It's a little wide, and that was really my doing. I didn't do a good enough job to get the seams to line up. And walk around to the other side. And again, the line is straight. And the seam is a little wide, but it is also even. Maybe we can move the door forward. If you look at the rear seam, it's really tight. So maybe we can move the door forward a little bit, and that'll close that seam right up. The pins have added a complication to raising the hood, but it can still be done by one person. What happens is the pins catch the lower edge of the fender, and that causes the fender not to go up. So what you got to do is walk around and unhook it. So we're going to raise it this far, and it gets caught on the pin over there. And if we raise this, push this fender back in on top of the pin, then we can come over on this side and free it from this pin and raise the hood. And it's the same thing going down. I truly think that we accomplished what we set out to do. I do the pins different. I do the stop different. Not sure how I'm going to do that. It's not elegant enough. But if you enjoyed this video, there'll be more